If that information is incorrect and it gets circulated widely enough, the next version of the LLM is going to say, oh, you know what? That's a fact. I'll push that through. And then you start getting more and more poisoning of the well. So I think we're in this sort of very dangerous world right now where not only are you likely to fall off the plank, you're likely to fall off the plank and take the sea with you, because as part and parcel of it, the plank's just become part of the problem. The boat that you've come off has, and actually the sea wasn't the sea you thought it was in the first place, because it's an older version of it.
Welcome back, everyone. And before we want to start with the main pod, I just wanted to thank everybody who has got in touch and given support to the show. I want to put a special shout out to Heather and Alexander, who have been really helpful in trying to iron out some of the kinks as we first got started. A few have asked about how they can support the show. And to be honest, the best thing you could do right now is just share the show with anybody who you think might be into our type of content. Howard and I were just kind of happy you're here. So we're not really in this for the money or anything like that. We just want to try and reach the audiences that we think might find this interesting. So on with the show. We have a very special pod today. We have another guest for you. His name is Mike Hawkes. And I'll be honest, he's got one of these bios. It's going to be a struggle for me to kind of do justice to. He is the Chief Technology Officer at Capventis, and he's also a Research Fellow at the Nuclear Futures Institute of Bangor University. And quite simply, he is the most technologically gifted man I have ever met in my entire career. He has a way with tech that's hard to put into words. He is an inventor. He has been responsible in some of the most major tech that most people listening will use in their day-to-day lives in a mobile and a network context. But I'm going to let him tell us a little bit about his background. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you for the intro. And it's a pleasure to be here. I think that life is full of opportunities, and it's up to you to take them at the right time. I started off in tech by sheer chance. I was working in Tandy Corporation, Radioshack Tandy, as a Saturday lad in crew. And I was about 13 or 14, and it was just when the home computer boom was coming to fruition. And as part and parcel of that, I saved up every penny that I made and bought myself a Tandy TRS-80, a good old Z80 machine, 16K of RAM. I mean, what could I do with all that memory? And from that, I got really involved with computing. But across the summer, just before I went into sixth form, there was an opportunity to take O-levels and A-levels in computer science in the sixth form as an adjunct to those that I was already taking. As part of the permission for companies coming into the UK with technology, people like IBM and Tandy, for that matter, if you were going to bring computer tech into the UK, you had to also publish the tech specs of the things that you were bringing in. So this meant that things like the listings for the chips inside the machines, the proms inside the machines, were available. And they were just part of the standard bit of documentation that came with the service manuals for these machines. Being on the inside, I had access to the service manuals. Most of the sales team in Tandy's at the time, with due respect to them, had absolutely no idea about computers. So on the Saturday, I had a queue of people working alongside, or queue of customers, beg your pardon, alongside me, that were buying bits for their Osbornes or for their bits and pieces that they were making from kits. And I learned computing from having to support these people, but also I learned from reading the chipsets and reading the listings for the chips. And so I actually learned the right way of doing things as far as they were concerned from the design perspective right from the very beginning. So when I went into sixth form, I wasn't looking at BASIC, and I was a typical snotty teenager going into sixth form. I didn't want to learn BASIC because it stood for Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, and I wasn't going to do anything that was beginners. No. So I learned assembly language. And so I cut my teeth really on Z80 assembler. Fast forward a little bit, to talk about opportunities. There was a chap that rang me out of the blue when I'd been doing a few bits and pieces with computers for local companies. Don't know how he got my number, but he said, "Hello, my name's David Donoghue, and I'm calling from Signal Radio in Stoke-on-Trent. And we run a thing called the Signal Money Mountain. And what we ask is that local people donate, or local companies donate into the radio station. We are going to auction them on air. All the money that's raised goes to local charities." And I said, "Okay, but I do software. I haven't really got anything I can give you." He said, no, that's not what I'm after. He said, "Our regular computer suppliers let us down. What we really want is to have every financial bid noted so that we can then basically, after the auction's finished, go and chase up all of these various people. But it being radio, we're going to get daft people doing bids when they're drunk. We're going to get people giving the wrong names. We're going to have Mickey Mouse bidding £10,000 for a Wedgwood vase. And the odds are it's not going to be real. So what we need to be able to do is go back through the history of all the people that have pledged their money and go back through it. And we also need this to be relayed in real time across to the main studio, so we can gather the information from the phone lines and then have it relayed into the studio. And then the DJs at the front desk can then go in and announce what's happening as it's happening. And I said, "Okay, fair enough. Seems easy enough. When do you need that for?" Bearing in mind this is Tuesday afternoon. He said Friday. So in the day or so that I had to actually write it and then get it across to Signal and get it tested, I cheated and used, at the time there was DBase software knocking around, so I used DBase 2 and just knocked a couple of forms together. It was really quick to do, but it gave me something to work with. And to get it relayed across to the main studio, I thought, well, all I need to do really is put a Y connector on the back of the monitor and have one monitor coming to me. The other one can be in the studio. They don't need to type anything in the studio. So they're literally going to get a real feed as I'm typing it in. They're going to see it. Note the words there as I type it in, because being a teenager, I was really quite impressed by the fact the local radio station wanted me to get involved with anything. So I went in and said, "Oh, well, of course, I can't guarantee it's going to work, and there may be problems. But so if I fly this stuff for you, it should be okay." And David said, "Yeah, fine, okay, I'll sit with you and we'll do it." So he flew the switchboard. I typed in the numbers, and across that weekend, it was a 72-hour stint, and across that weekend, we became really good friends. And towards the end of it, David said, "I really need to know a lot more about computer tech," because he was an analog station person. And I said, "Okay, I need to know a lot more about all of this, broadcast and sound engineering and everything that goes with that." So we came to an agreement. I would teach him computing. He would teach me broadcast engineering. And from there, a whole line of things started happening. Through my own interests, I was really passionate about music, and because I was now learning how to do engineering properly for music, I became a music producer, and we produced all manner of groups and interesting things. I became a DJ on Signal for quite a while, and we were doing drive time, but I was also doing DJing in the raves up and down the M6 corridor. We called them the corridor raves. And if you were listening to Signal Radio on a Wednesday for the traffic news, there would be an announcement to the effect of, "This coming Saturday, it's going to get very busy around Junction A." And that was the information that everyone needed to know, where the cars would come and meet them from the M6 and take them to the nearest warehouse that we had managed to purloin perfectly legally and above board, of course. So I ended up doing DJing and raves and things like this, and got a load of equipment together over putting the money back into the kit. And then they made them illegal, so we did it for just a little while longer. And then they made it really illegal so they could confiscate kits. So I stopped doing that and went DJing in the clubs. And this is a complete contrast to the life that I was then leading professionally, which was I had by this time gone into working in the defense sector, and I was working on nuclear submarines and all things doing designs of tech in that environment. And so I had this completely separate side to everything that was going on. I had the professional side that was on a nuclear submarine, very regulated. I was designing at that time life-critical systems, so I had to learn how to deal with systems that could not fail under any circumstances. People were going to rely on the stuff that I was doing. Failure here was not an option. Alongside that, I was broadcasting on an evening, every evening, basically going out on signal radio. So I'd dash home from being able to say absolutely nothing about everything I was doing to saying everything about nothing that was going on in the same day. And then at the weekends, I would dash back on a Friday afternoon, go into the clubs and DJ in the clubs. Saturday morning was spent getting music together. Saturday night was DJing. Sunday night was DJing. Dash in the car all the way back up to the Lake District on the Monday morning to start back in the defence sector. As all the defence stuff came to an end, I got involved then with David came back to me and said, you know what, I need somebody to come in and be our technical director. By that time, David had become the CTO of the broadcast group as a whole, and that included a TV station and a radio station. So we had 6 TV studios and 3 radio studios to bring under the wing. And as part of that, we were going to take it from being an analog station to being digital. The cost of that were prohibitive, but nonetheless, we still did it. So for those that are into their tech, Paintbox and Harry and these kind of things, £250,000 to take an image, wrap it around a wine glass, shatter the wine glass. So you would have seen that kind of thing on Kenny Everett and those kind of programs back in the day. And through that, we got things like the International Powerboat Championships, loads of stories around that, then into cows and the yacht racing, even more from that. Chance encounter. Coming back from Cow's Yacht Race, I'm sat there on the ferry, and this bloke sat next to me. He's one of the journalists, as far as I'm concerned. He says, Mike, can you put video on the internet? This is in 1993. I said, yeah, we should be able to do that. I mean, we need some really specialist kit, and it's really expensive. So I was trying to put him off. And he said, okay, money's no object. And I said, well, if money's no object, yeah, we can do it. But it's time, then, is the other thing that we've got here. And he said, let me put it in context. He said, I'm the yachting correspondent for the Times newspaper. We're going to do the America's Cup. And what we'd like to do is have a digital section to the America's Cup. And how would you like to do it? Okay, I'll do that then. So I found myself then in California working with a whole host of really, really amazing people. So there was Silicon Graphics. They were all nutters, but amazingly good people. There was Sun Microsystems, CQ Microsystems, IBM. I had a Cray XMP at my disposal to do modeling of yachts as they were racing in the San Diego Bay, looking at the tidal flows and the wind and capturing all of those and moving them around. Within the space of tail end of 93 into 94, I had basically designed and built the video encoding systems that would allow us to simultaneously video and take real-time video feeds from the yachts as they were racing and encode them for the internet and also encode them so that we could transmit them across satellites for broadcasters at the same time. Massive, massive amount of work. There were probably millions and millions of dollars worth of hardware by the time we'd done that were all donated by people wanting to get their name on the screens. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal opportunities out in the States. And I had an absolute ball out there. You know, it was tough, but somebody had to do it. And from that side, we got ripped off in a massive way. Put this website together, which was just a tail end thing. And yeah, when you look at it now, it was effectively YouTube or Netflix for yacht racing, way before any of those things were there. But somebody returned a T-shirt and we hadn't issued any yet. And that fraud side of life suddenly kicked in. Hold on, people are selling stuff that we haven't put out on our site. And when we started looking, it was millions of dollars worth of stuff that had gone through to people in Taiwan or across in China or all over the world. And I couldn't get anybody to do anything about it at all. And that was really frustrating. So San Diego police really hadn't heard of the internet at that time, let alone what online fraud was about. They called the FBI in. The FBI all turned up in grey suits, in grey cars. It was great. But they had just a statement that said, look, you're a UK resident working for a UK company on behalf of a French company, because Louis Vuitton owned the America's Cup. The offence is being committed overseas. The only bit that happens to be here is the computer that I was sleeping in and around because we didn't have a data center or anything like that. So I literally had in my hotel room lots of kit. This stuff that you've got here, it just happens to be on American soil. Nothing to do with us. Go and talk to your own police. Back to Staffordshire Police, local police force. The Interwhat, they forwarded me across to Scotland Yard Computer Crime Unit. At the time, we're very new to all of this, and they said, look, this is a question of police, of who's paying for the policing rather than it being an issue for policing. And there were no international frameworks at this time. So I sat down with the then Secretary of State for the DTI, Bob Roche, and we drafted what became the Distance Selling Directive globally. and put together the standards then that would apply for that. And I also invented a mechanism then to protect people online from fraud. And it's a very basic principle. There's three of us on this call at the moment. So there's you, Mark, and Howard. So let's say I'm going to buy something from Mark and I'm with the Bank of Howard. There are three parties here. If we all have two pieces of information out of the three, then none of us have got enough information to impersonate the whole thing. And that very simple basis meant that if I'm talking to the Bank of Howard can send me something that I know is genuine from Howard. And he can ask me for the 2nd, 9th, and 306th digit of my secret passcode, which I can send to him. If Mark happens to be listening in on that connection, it doesn't matter because there's insufficient information there for Mark to be able to do any other transaction on my behalf. But there's also a secret transaction going on in behind the scenes between Mark and Howard that I don't see. So the amount that the bank is presenting to me to make the transaction is actually coming from Mark to Howard and then from Howard to me. So we are all in agreement on the amount. I can see the amount on both sides. I've agreed to buy this thing for 10 quid off Mark. Mark has sent a bill across to Howard for £10. Howard has sent it back to me. So the only common piece of information across this entire landscape is actually the amount. That I patented. Terrible choice of investor. Absolutely terrible choice of investor. We got to the point where we built the tech. I'd invested the best part of £1 million in hardware. Again, using silicon graphics for high performance computing. And we were going to do every single financial transaction in the world with this thing. And just as we're getting towards the final stages of building it and had the team there, we built the tech, got it to scale. It was all looking really good. The guy decided he had enough then to run with it without me and served me with a high court injunction saying I was attempting to steal the business from him. And that was it. It actually prohibited me from working until I could defend myself adequately from the IT world at all. So everything came crashing down. I had to sell everything that I had in order to defend myself and to allow myself to work in the IT sector again. And of course, I'd lost the IP. It had gone. So at that point, I spoke to the guys at Scotland Yard were just amazing, absolutely amazing, because they were supporting everything we were doing. And when it came to a big financial conference, the head of the CCU had basically said, well, I would have been supporting this had the original founders still been involved with it, but I wouldn't touch this. And that entire thing just stopped. But at that point, the credit card companies and the insurance companies got together and started then implementing what I'd done. It's become 3D Secure framework, and it is the thing that protects literally every financial transaction across the world right now. So that was the first bit. In the meantime, I was then looking at mobile and saying, how the heck do we protect people online? So from the mobile side of it, then I created secure mobile messaging systems, put encryption in there in a way that you didn't need to type in a password every time you were sending a message. I sold the patents to that to a global messaging company. That company spun this particular part of it out into its own thing. We sold the patents into that company. We went from startup to floating on AIM in around about 9 months. So we did that. All the markets collapsed in the August of that year. We basically got sold on as public companies do. And I found myself really, they gave me a great title. It was Director of Innovation for global products inside the much bigger communications company at the time. And I became the director of the Mobile Data Association here in the UK, heading up how people would use mobile data and these kind of things. And then later I became its chairman. And I also headed up Mobile Futures to the GSM. So the GSM Association being the underlying body for mobile standards globally. And so I'd implemented these things. We'd got all manner of bits and pieces going. I did designs for the Olympics, and at peak we were shifting 6 terabytes of data a second. So again, scalability the hard way, and getting spare capacity in the UK networks to allow us to run the Olympics and also have things around the edge of it, like the Monarch potentially dying at the same time and being able to run separate media channels for categories of information. Part of that was getting involved with the companies putting Wi-Fi on London Underground. And so on and so on and so on. I'd invented another set of technology by this time, and that was picked up by NTT in Malaysia, and we ended up working with Singapore Power, and I spent time out in Singapore and Malaysia. And eventually, all of this sort of came back into the UK, and I was introduced to a chap called John Glennan at Cat Ventus, and I became the CTO at Cat Ventus. So it's been a very long journey, and probably that's the longest introduction you've had from anybody on the program so far. But really, what I've been able to do across all of this, the broadcast side of things, has been absolutely fascinating, and to watch that industry change and to see everything change within it. It has been a really, really interesting journey, and it's one I'm still in today. So even last year, I was working on an album for a friend, and we were he was digging out his statics because he was selling his house over in Liverpool, and he used to be in a group called Christians, and then It's Immaterial and a few others. And this was from when they were in a group called the Yachts, and he came across these old cassettes, and we probably had one chance at running this past their heads before they disintegrated. And it was their original studio recordings on cassette tape. And we took that and digitized it and then cleaned it all up. And the introduction then of digital tech, I was sitting there looking at this thing saying there would be no way I could have done this back in the late 80s, early 90s, because the tech just didn't exist. And now that it does exist, it's actually in everybody's hands. So the stuff that I was looking at, taking an image, wrapping it around a wine glass and shattering it, I can now do that in a handheld computer, and I can do it in seconds where it took hours and hours. We had an animation suite with 22 animators doing this kind of thing. And you look at it now, technology has moved, data has moved, the consumption of data has been fundamentally different. And the design of how you actually put these systems together is actually exactly the same. Underneath it all, it's still exactly the same stuff as when I started my journey back in Tandy and Radioshack all those many, many, many moons ago. So even though we're looking at modern tech and modern ways of doing things, the world really hasn't changed that much from the underlying tech. And I think it's really important that people get an understanding of some of the equipment that they're using. And I lament for some of the students that are in universities these days that only get to see the web side of life and only get to see that shiny front end, and that they don't actually get to see the stuff underneath it. So there you go. There's a fair old introduction. I'm sorry it's taken a while.
You can see why I struggled. I was thinking about how I'm going to put your bio together. I'll explain to people listening why I've invited you to this show specifically. I mean, first, okay, we've been friends for a long time. We are in a difficult position because unfortunately neither me or Howard, or you as it happens, can talk about the main things we worked on when you were working with us in the police, which is a bit of a problem really, because I would really like to talk about some of the things that we got up to, but we can't. What I can say is the following. So I came to know you because you came to do a lecture at West Yorkshire Police the training school where Howard used to work, and you did a lecture, I think, on how the police could basically make better use of internet data and internet related information. This was before open source was even known as a term, really. It was very early on. I was working on Howard's team at the time, and Howard had tasked me, and Howard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, and he only told me this story recently, which I was quite surprised to hear, but basically my previous inspector had, when I had applied to join Howard's team, had attempted to basically sabotage my application and said things like, well, the problem with Lockie is he's always reading about things all from all around the world, and, he's always off on their blue sky thinking and all the rest of it. And so you were one of the blue sky projects for me, because it was like, right, okay, Howard had tasked me with saying, we've got this new intel unit. I want it to be cutting edge. I want it to be the best. I want to talk to academia. I want to talk to business. How do we do that? And you were my gateway into that. And yeah, so sorry, Howard, is there anything you want to say about it before I carry on?
Well, it's an observation. I mean, your description of Mike as a genius is entirely well-deserved, and I speak as a non-tech. One of the things that stands out to me is one of Mike's many skills, forget the tech skills, is actually the ability to think in a new way and apply common sense, basic good ideas that any bumpkin could come up with, but see how you could convert that into something that operates through a really complex thing, which is tech and evolving tech. And it's always evolving. And that is a skill set. It's like any genius, the ability to describe complex things in simple ways and work with some complex things, but communicate them simply, is one of the many things that struck me with Mike from the first day I met him. And nothing changes. People are what they are. It's just a gift. But the second thing is listening to Mike describe his history and all the weak points in it. The good points are, what a coincidence, isn't fate funny? The weak points are human nature, not grasping the idea, people having selfish or non-merit-based drivers, the 7 deadly sins, shall we say. The weakest link in dealing with anything these days is the human-to-human link, not the technology-to-technology link. That could be managed out, shall we say, that can be evaluated. But Mike's talked about, and I totally agree with him from what little I know, that people don't look at the technology anymore. They look at the veneer of its usability and its application rather than understanding the mechanics of it. I get that. I'm one of the worst abusers of that because I don't know how the tech works, but I know enough to know how little I know. But I'm always questioning it. And if I can't question it, I go to somebody who I can trust to break it apart. I like taking things to bits. But one of the things I wondered, Mike, and I'm leading to a question here, long-windedly though I am, is one of the things that's particularly happening now more than ever before with social media and good old AI is, like you say, students, but it's everybody in life, tend to go away and look at the internet for their information source and be happy with what they're presented without drilling down. With AI, where before you'd drill down and look at, I don't know, some Google search or whatever, so you'd read the presented information or listen to the presented information or watch the video about the presented information and accept it or not. You couldn't really challenge it. It's not a debate. It is what it is. It's like going to a library and reading the book. You need to read other books to come up with different views. But with AI, what I'm really noticing at the moment, the new wave of social media buffoons, people who probably can't cut their own bread, and put their own clothes on, but they're all producing these videos on social media saying, oh, yes, AI, go away, there are these 20 AI tools. Ask the question of one of the AI products, and it'll give you 10 ideas to make money. Go to this other AI source, and it will design you the business plan. Another one will design you the technology and write the code. Another one will draw you an app if you want one. Another one will market it. Another one will give you the payment platform and process. No problem with all of that. But they actually have, it's not even that they had, like you had, and we've both done it, had the germ of a good idea and then worked hard to turn it into something practical. A good idea is a good idea. The AI scheme coming up with the idea for these people. And I really wonder, like you say, the computer students, whether or not these people who are designing these products, and it ain't just individuals on social media, it's businesses, it's public sector organisations, it's governments, people who, like you mentioned with the Navy, the nuclear submarines. These are mission critical systems, not just get-rich-quick schemes. At what point do we go so far on this plank of relying on the tech that we're presented with without understanding how it works? Are we in danger of the plank giving way and us falling in the sea and being eaten by the sharks?
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Okay. So a couple of things. First of all, we're seeing a world at the moment where we came from lots of computer systems that were hugely expensive, very big. Probably there are only a handful of them in the world when they first started off. Hugely expensive, difficult to operate, all this kind of stuff. The home computer boom came along, and then the IBM PC came hot on the heels of that. And then we saw this explosion of people being able to use relatively cheap computers in different ways. And this led to the fragmentation, not just of the technology, but also the applications that were running around with them. And after a while, all of these things started separating out into what my friend John calls a pointy solution for things. So you'd have something that would do your accounts, you'd have something else that you would do your planning on, and you'd have something else that you do your processing on, and you just have all of these various pointy solutions, lots of them. And you also ended up duplicating the data across all of these various things. So I might be Mike on one platform, Michael on another, I'm ID number 123 on that system, and I'm an A179 on another one, and so on and so on. And never these things shall meet until people got hold of Excel, and then they tried to mangle these things together and make it look like this all sort of works in a vaguely sensible way. So some of the stuff I'm working on at the moment is trying to resolve all of that, and perhaps we can touch on that in a bit. But the world really went then into this cloud environment. So now we moved from having everything locally to saying it's too expensive for us to create lots of computer spaces and systems. You're back about 15, 20 years, I guess. Everyone was building their own mini data center in their office. There was a rack of servers sat somewhere all humming away. And then people started saying, hold on a minute, this isn't particularly secure because Beryl is coming in, unplugging the lot while she hoovers and then plugging it back in again when she's leaving the office. Or Fred's coming in and reading everybody else's email because there was no security on any of it. And so they then started bringing up the standards, and you sort of saw the emergence of ISO 27001. You saw the emergence of proper processes and procedures, TIC-IT, ISO 9001. You had all these sort of things starting to come along. And at this point, people were trying to standardize things. And it became too expensive at that point for you to own your own equipment, because you now needed a security guard in order to tick the box that said, are your premises secured at night? Have you got proper backups? All these kind of things. All of these things started getting really expensive for you to do yourself. So you push it out into the cloud and let somebody else manage it. So there's step one towards AI. Now you've actually lost control of your data, and the data is being moved around all around the world, and you have absolutely no idea where this thing actually lives. So then you have to be able to guarantee that this is not going to move outside the EU because of the particular rules that started to play with GDPR and all these kind of things. In the meantime, the pointy solutions have got even more pointy, and they're now trying to sell themselves into being able to do everything in one platform, and of course they can't. And what you then started having to do was find ways of integrating these systems and bringing them together until we ended up with integration systems and data warehouses, data lakes, and nowadays you've got data lake houses, which is sort of a combination of all of them. And in order to understand all of this, you then pointed machine learning at this, because none of it was quite complex enough yet. So you needed to add machine learning, and you needed to have the machines then look at all of this data and tell you what was going on. The problem with that is you've got too much data. So what you actually do is take an extract from all your systems, mangle them in Excel, throw them into a data analytics tool, and hope that it makes sense when you get something out at the other end of it. And as part and parcel of that, you're also working on stuff that is now naturally old data. You've gone from the point of having something that was live and operational and in front of you there and then to being a week later when you're looking at some kind of output from an analytics engine. Machine learning came along to try and shorten that life cycle, but also to try and give you some kind of insight into what was going on. The problem is, with all of the machine learning tools, you have absolutely no idea what it's going to come out with if you just say, give me something. So you need to know the right question to ask of the data, and you need to understand what the answer actually means when it comes back, particularly if it's coming back as data. Because the assumption here that you actually understand what's come back is a very, very big assumption. And the number of times I've been into organizations that said, oh, I've had this bit of data from the system. When you look at it, it's not sales data, it's actually revenue, or it's something else. And because along the way, it's been changed on the column name to something else, everything assumes, including machine learning, those assumptions are now buried into those machine learning models. And what you're getting out of the other end is absolute junk if you're not careful. Now, what we've seen is this development of things like GPUs. GPUs are fantastic pieces of hardware designed originally, obviously, for the graphics world. What they're able to do is analyzing incredibly small pieces of information very quickly, but do it lots and lots and lots of times. And so what you see with the large language models and these kind of things, okay, they're clever and They can assume that, get a rough idea of what you're going to say. But it's all based on the odds of you wanting this thing following this thing following this thing. And the more people that follow that path, the LLMs are going to give you that particular response. So this is taking stuff that's already in existence, analyzing the heck out of it, and saying, here are the patterns that most people want to get out of these things. It's not true innovation. So give me an idea for a great business thing. Actually, they're not great business things because they're all over the world. There are lots of them, but these are the ones that are currently making money. Therefore, there's a fair chance that that would appease you. You can do all the various things. There's proof here that from a language model, it isn't actually doing calculations nicely. So you get it to add numbers together, it gives you a completely ludicrous total. They're correcting these kind of things over time, but you can ask it to do all manner of things, and it will always give you a response. The fact that those responses can be completely hallucinated because it's just coming from evidence and information that's been provided in the past is a problem. The next problem that's coming, and some people are starting to mention this now, and I'm really glad that they are, is that we are looking at a historical set of data. All the large language models look backwards. They analyze this information. They're giving you the likelihood is that it's going to be this is your answer. And then they create this text around it so you can have your give me that in a few paragraphs so I can post it online. And the second you've done that, you've just poisoned your own well. If that information is incorrect and it gets circulated widely enough, the next version of the LLM is going to say, oh, you know what? That's a fact. I'll push that through. And then you start getting more and more poisoning of the well. So I think we're in this sort of very dangerous world right now where not only are you likely to fall off the plank, you're likely to fall off the plank and take the sea with you. Because as part and parcel of it, the plank's just become part of the problem. The boat that you've come off has, and actually the sea wasn't the sea you thought it was in the first place because it's an older version of it. One of the things, I'll stop rambling in a second, but one of the things that I find fascinating is that I keep playing with the coding models and say, give me some code that will do this. And it's really interesting because there's a cutoff point for the large language models that says we stopped analyzing at this date and this time when we ran the information into the model. Of course, the web evolves and all tech continues to evolve beyond that date. So you're also getting a point in time that has a big problem for me because I might be using the newest, shiniest library that somebody's just produced as a code base. And the LLM has absolutely no idea. The machine learning has no idea that thing even exists, let alone what it is. So they'll either ignore it completely, or if they've just seen the first release of it, you might get versions 1, 2, and 7 of a library being mixed together because they sort of make sense to the language model. You would then put your coding in, it looks like it's working, but actually what you've just done is completely corrupted your own software because you're using version 1, 3, 7, 19, 22, whatever versions you've got. It looks good. It sort of runs, but it's a complete mangle of what's there. Now, again, if you're prepared to go live with that without understanding what's happening, then you really are giving yourself a problem later on when you suddenly realize that this isn't quite what you thought it was. Just one stat that's interesting. There was some research done in the last 6 months or thereabouts. I think it was MIT, and they were looking at the retention of information after you'd written something, and they were getting people to write notes for a lecture, and they allowed one group to use LLMs. They had a control group that were allowed to use the internet and Google and things like that, and they had another group that they had to do everything from the ground up. It got to the point where after 3 or 4 iterations of doing this, the people that were using the LLMs stopped fact-checking it and just used it. But not only that, they could only remember for 8 minutes the material that they'd just put into their notes. So if you're looking at this and saying, you're actually making people more stupid by using the very tools that you're hoping will help them because they're now just relying on the tech and they're not questioning it. And that, again, is very dangerous. So I think that the AI here is a very powerful tool. Absolutely got to know what you're feeding it. And you've also absolutely got to know what you're questioning and what you're hoping to get as your response. And you've also got to be able to understand the results and question them like mad, because at the end of the day, this is just a probability engine.
That's gold. I mean, what it reminds me of, Mark and I have always talked about being, as analysts and information scientists in our world of law enforcement, the need to explain to our customers, on the one hand, as part of the early negotiations, to try and establish what they're really asking, because they often don't know what they're asking. They don't know how to phrase the question. And that's not a criticism. Senior managers and stakeholders have lots of other pressures and other drivers and factors to consider that we don't. But we are the information scientists with a small I and a small s. But the second thing is interpreting the data and giving them a sort of a QA process that says, well, here's a chart. And the classic example is, here's a particular chart. And they would say, well, I don't need an analyst to help me understand that chart. I can understand images. And it's kind of like, I've always said, well, could you read a fingerprint? You know what a fingerprint looks like, but can you identify the walls and all the features in the data that an expert would identify to say that it's fingerprint of Howard rather than fingerprint of Bach? Or B, an X-ray. It's an image generated by a machine, but you have to be trained for years to interpret that image. Black shadows and everything else can mean lots of things. And they didn't get it. And what you're talking about here is that multiplied exponentially. We had a really interesting conversation with another genius in a different way. A colleague of ours called John Elliott, who works on SETI, this idea of we'll generate a system to make first contact with aliens. And again, I can't touch him. His brain power and his perspective, I'm not fit to polish his shoes, basically. I love the guy. But he was describing all these systems and how hard they'd worked. But it still came down to the point that you made. Well, it's based on our historic understanding. We're basing it on what we know already. And we're designing something, because we're all human, that ultimately is humanistic. We're trying to, you're almost humanizing the alien in the same way that I think sometimes we might be guilty of humanizing the IT, humanizing AI. Oh, it thinks like we do. No, it doesn't. We as human beings, we pick up new information all the time through our senses, whether or not we realize that. As you say, the AI is not doing that. And I wonder if there are two phases now. One, the new kind of analyst with a small a, which is what you're talking about, somebody who can do QA and say, well, hang on, before you jump into these large language models and what they're generating, you need to understand how they work and what they're telling you and what they're not telling you, the Donald Rumsfeld approach. But secondly, whilst everybody's focused on AI, dealing with the known knowns and the unknowns in the knowns, who's actually going out there thinking, how could we create usable data sets that collect new information or information that's not normally available to large language models? And maybe that's the next growth industry.
That sort of brings me very, very neatly, thank you, as a segue into what I'm doing at the moment. Because one of the things you probably guessed from the backstory that I'm not afraid of taking on a challenge here or there, but also looking at things. I tend to have quite a cynical view of the world, and when we look at data, our problem is actually that we're looking at it in the wrong way. We came at it from the 1950s and 60s, from when you stored information, you had to store it on tape. And you had to basically say a record is 10 bytes long, so move the tape 10 bytes along, and your next record will start at byte 11 onwards. And so you had fixed size records to make things very easy to be able to shuttle the tape around. And then hard drives came along, and they basically mapped those sectors and tapes. Same thing on a hard drive now. Go to cylinder 3, so many bytes in, and there's where the record's going to be. Fixed size records, very easy to calculate where you're going to be. We move forward to today, and the first thing I see in a lot of projects is that they'll go along, and the first thing they'll do is create a SQL database. So there you go. 1973 SQL databases came into being. You shiny new tech, and you're immediately putting this into a piece of tech. The other thing is you're probably doing a pointy solution to add to the massive pointy solutions you've already got, which means you're going to need Excel, you're going to need some kind of brain power to pull it all together. Why not have a data lake, data warehouse? And we're straight back into this huge, great model stuff again before you go anywhere. So in a conversation with John at Capventis, we started saying, well, let's put the world to rights over a pint. It's a bad thing to get us talking over a pint. It really is. Because at that point, if you're going to correct this, how do you do it? Well, you have to change the way that the world works with data. And so the project that we're doing at the moment and everything we're doing is literally turning data on its head. And instead of working in tables and these kind of things, what we're doing is we're saying that you only ever need three things really to be able to describe the entire world in terms of data. And they are entities. So you, I, the computers that we're talking through, the microphones, these are all entities. There are attributes of those entities. Now, if you keep those to a minimum, just enough to describe the thing that your entity, then you can bring these together very nicely and through a relationship. So what we now have is literally just those three things: entities, attributes, and relationships. And with those, I'm able to say things like, give me a list of all the people that are on this podcast from this date to this date using these pieces of technology that said the following words. I haven't got to move outside my model. I haven't got to design a whole raft of tables and other bits and pieces to do it. And the technology that we're developing based on the back of this, we've spent the last 4 years nearly now on building this platform and the tech to do it. But it's genuinely transformational in the way that it's operating. And again, we got to the point where we suddenly realized that the various languages that you use to query these things also don't fulfill their need of what we're trying to do. We're working with entities. So I don't want to say, give me a list of people that are in this organization that have a home phone number. I want these kind of queries. And the GraphQLs of this world and the SQLs of this world don't really do that. You're either going to be targeting a table or you're going to be targeting just the relationships. I want to match it all together. So what I ended up doing at that point is saying, let's reinvent SQL. So we've completely generated a new way of operating with data and bringing it together. We've also brought a complete new language and a way of working with it in a way that people actually understand. And when they see this stuff, they start getting very excited. So I'm really excited. We're going to be starting to bring this to the main market probably early part of next year. We're into beta trials right now. But that principle of data and what do you need and where do you need it, one of the fundamental pieces here is that I'm saying there's only one of me. So let's have one of me in this model. Now, you can link anything you like to me. This can be a tax record. It can be a health record. It can be a visit to a holiday camp somewhere if I want to go out. It can be anything. But I only need one of me. And the important thing is that because it's me, I'd like to be in control of me. So can I put the controls in place that allow me to share me and the version of me that I want to present to a particular audience? My business side, and certainly when I was in the defence world, I wouldn't have presented the DJ me out in the raves on a Friday night in a purloined warehouse or in an empty field. Very, very few people knew that I was doing up to that kind of thing in a weekend. And from that side of life, I would have had a very different persona. And I want to have the right to be schizophrenic online. I need that right. And what we're doing with data allows me to do that. But it also allows me to say there is only one instance of anything. We get rid of the duplication. We get rid of the need for copying this stuff into Excel and mangling it because I can query it directly in real time. I get rid of the need for data warehouses and data lakes. We don't need all of these secondary and tertiary sort of storage areas for these things anymore. So what we're doing here is, as I say, genuinely transformational. But it also flips design on its head because we stop designing systems in a way that we have done traditionally. So again, we're not thinking in terms of here is a structure that we need to work with. We're actually saying, what do you need from your system? How do you want it to operate? And I think that's fundamental as well. That understanding of what you need to do in order to get an operational system in front of you. Actually, the first thing is, what do you want this thing to do? And what do you want to be able to do with this thing? And that question, quite a lot of people never ask when they start doing a systems design. They just design the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think just sense check what I'm about to say right now, because I see this from a perspective of a career analyst who has spent decades trying to make sense of those as you say, primary, secondary, and tertiary records. I see, and this is related to your point about understanding the underlying basic tech, right? And seeing it evolve from analog to basic digital to higher forms of digital. I think that when it comes to how humans record information, IT over the decades, basically, as you alluded to, started off with quite conventional ways of this is how you do it. These are how records work. Some of it was influenced by some of the technological means you mentioned, but some of it was also influenced by card index files, library systems, that kind of information storage protocol that we'd inherited that from books, right? And kind of, old school information storage principles. But what tech would say, hey, you, the user, you know your business area better than anyone. So you record anything you like. It's almost like, how the spreadsheet is almost like infinite number of columns and infinite number of rows. It's a flat canvas. A blank canvas, you go do what you like. And we did. As a species, we started recording data as we liked. And then this led to initially simple tables and then relational databases and then relational databases that are so complex that you need to design specialist tools to try and get the data back out. And I've spent a career as somebody who's tried to parse and navigate that complexity. And I find it fascinating that if I recap what you've just said, you're essentially at the spear tip of IT, reversing direction completely. Because what you're saying is, for the last few decades, IT has said, look, we're agnostic to how you want to record what you're doing. We're just going to facilitate it. We're going to make we'll make you the wood, if you like, for this digital IKEA furniture, but you make what you want to make. And that's made it really messy, right? And that's made it really complicated. And there's an entire industry dedicated to passing that complexity. And now what you're saying now is, actually, at the point of design, we will basically structure how you record your data in a very simplistic fashion. And I know the lineage of where those three fields come from without going into too much detail. And because you are getting people to record data in a very simple way, that immediately designs out that need for the complex parsing and things like that. And I think it's high time it was done, because I was been worried for decades that things are just getting messier and messier and messier. And just to go back to an earlier point Howard raised initially about the AI stuff. I see the AI, I have mixed feelings. Okay. So is AI essentially this averaging product? Absolutely. I think of it in terms of conceptual averaging. It's a little bit like in the 90s where you had those video morphing where you got two images and you generated a new image from the source data, and then you have this apparently new image, but actually it's derivative from the source data. So I do see AI, large language model responses, as this conceptual averaging of it's gone away, it's passed a load of books or a load of content, and it's given me some sort of mathematically driven conceptual average of these are things you're likely to want, answers you're likely to want. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because in a labor saving point of view, it's a hell of a lit review, right? Imagine giving that to a human being and saying, go away, pass this immense data library of books, paper, content, whatever, and bring me the average of what everyone has said and do it in a way that's passable. That's no mean feat, and no human being could do that. I think the risk comes because, and we'll get onto your point about training data being contaminated, it's an important one. But the first risk comes when the LLM output is the end of the story. For me, AI is its most powerful, or LLMs are its most powerful when the AI output is the start of the analytical or interactive inquiry, not the end. Because I think that's when LLMs are rubbish at generating new content. They can't innovate, but human beings can do a lit review using AI and say, okay, this is what the system says. Where do I take that? And to your second point about data, LLM output being fed into training data, yeah, I think that's the biggest risk of all, because I think what we're going to get now, if we think of LLM content as the conceptual average of everything that's known, what we're talking about is essentially a conceptual collapse of the gene pool. Because that training data, that output, the hallucinations, the errors, all the content that can be created at volume and scale that we can't even begin to quantify or predict, suddenly completely collapses that kind of I might call it a conceptual gene pool. I don't mean literal genes, but you know what I mean. I'm just talking about the actual. There will be stuff that's right in there. There's going to be an increasing amount of stuff that's wrong in there, and if it's generating that as the average, that's going to cause us a whole lot of problems down the track.
Yeah, it is, and I think that as well as that, you get into a very strange world with the AI stuff again. From just looking at your training data and where you're getting your data from, those sources are really important. But also, you have to be able to define to the LLM how you want that to be parsed and understood. And I suppose there's a classic one here. Going back to the police and the intelligence world, your IP address isn't you, and your mobile phone number isn't you. It's a device hung off at the end of a network somewhere, and I can spoof these things. So part of the analysis has to then be, was that spoofed? How can we now physically put that device in that person's hand at that time? And I look at the politicians that are saying, and my favorite quote from any politician is that encryption isn't binary, you know. And you just hold on a second. You can't say that. It's just so stupid as a statement. But that was a Home Secretary who was saying, encryption isn't binary. Therefore, as far as we're concerned, there should be a grey area where the government can look in on all of this and understand what it is. So provide us with the back door, Apple. No, you can't do that. If anyone gets hold of the back door, you are completely screwed. Absolutely screwed. If I was going to go all out on tech, I'd say actually with just 4 hacks in this world, I could probably disable the whole of the Western world. You hack Microsoft, you hack Apple, you hack your Linux kernel, and by definition, because it's Linux, you also get your Androids in there. But those 4, if you just basically grab those 4, you have basically disabled Western world. Do I want a back door in tech? No, I don't. I really, really, really don't. I can remember there's a chap in the GSMA on the security forum, love him to death, a smashing bloke, who we had this guy come in and present some encryption tech that he was considering for use in the mobile world and was trying to get our steer on it. And he had the unfortunate job of trying to convince us that this was good for mobile and it was actually secure. The chap I'm referring to, very, very, very well spoken, came from the Cabinet Office. So tell me, how would we be able to comply with legal requirements with lawful intercept in this? This guy, thinking on his feet, came back with, well, we can always put a back door in this. And there was just that moment where we went, back door? We don't want doors in mobile. Thank you very much. And that was it. He was out. But it was just that the whole principle that people don't understand the tech. People don't understand the first thing about it. And as a result of that, this encryption and protection, and I get a real beam up on it with health data. Health data is probably the single most abused thing anywhere. And again, I'm over in Wales, back end of nowhere in the UK. As a result, I have an English NHS number, I have a Welsh NHS number, I have a local hospital number because I visit the hospital in the UK. I've got another number for that hospital in that UK. I've got my GP's reference number. If I go in for scans or something along those lines, I then get yet another number from none of these meet none of them. And there's a very real risk here that you can see all these various information sources basically being corrupted and being misaligned. And, I got fear going in for an operation to have a mastectomy. It's this kind of thing where, come in, Mrs. Hawke. No, you got the wrong one. So, I think there's a very real risk with this. And again, if we look at this, put it back into the AI world. If I'm putting this kind of data into an LLM and I'm not being explicit about how the rules actually align all of these data sets and how you have to manage these data sets, you can end up with some very weird results that look completely legitimate on the face of it. And that's a real risk. It's a real risk.
It is. And I think that if you look at the Howard's right, there's a lot of junk out there. I mean, LinkedIn's always had problems, but at the moment, there's just a fire hose of AI content or AI secondary content where people are either saying AI is about to be ushers into a brave new world, and the other crew, which AI is horrible, don't use it. You've got this vicious kind of Luddites versus the futurists going on. I think the truth is somewhere in between. But it's really tricky, right? I think that it's like any tool, and it's about how you use that tool. But I think the thing is, humans have this deep need for a solution that thinks of everything and solves all of the primary and secondary problems. What we don't want is, well, here is a tool that you need to handle with care, even though that's every tool that it doesn't matter if it's a chainsaw or a car or whatever, all of our tools need to be handled with care. It's just most of our tools are geographically focused in one place and time. Now what we're talking about, as you say, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about how our digital infrastructure is structured, but it's like there are ways in which these things could collapse, and there are ways in which these things are quite tenuous. And I completely agree with you. I don't believe, my personal view now is I would rather have uninterceptable means of communication as the cost for not having the alternative, which is these backdoor systems for which you have no governance or control on those backdoors. Because I feel that if you had that backdoor network, I would really worry, because to me, the backdoor network is where things get very Orwellian and very dangerous, because you know what will happen. Essentially, what you have is this system, and I'm not suggesting, I'm not limiting this to the UK. I'm talking about in a global context. We know right now there are nation states that have, shall we say, very Orwellian level of controls on their digital networks and their content, and it is translating into real life impact. It may constrain what job you get, where you go. It may literally result in you disappearing, and that's not that far away. So for me, absolutely, I'm 100% with you.
What Mike said really struck a chord with me, and what you've just said at the beginning, if you remember, I said the limiting factor in all this is that we're human beings. As a species, we've survived and succeeded to take over the planet through our ability to use our intellect and tools. Tools protect us from the environment. They improve our quality of life so that we survive as a species. You know, I'm sat in a room that's got double glazing and heating and light and clothing and the spectacles. They are tools just as much as AI is a tool. But it's kind of the old, guns don't kill, people kill. AI doesn't kill, the people who use AI kill. So it's the tool, but it's the way that the people use the tool. But going back to what Mike said when he was explaining what he's doing at the moment, that really struck a chord, Mike. Firstly, I liked the idea of you sitting as an entity in the middle of a Venn diagram where you have all these other areas that you impact in, your personal life, your social life, business A, business B, hobbies, whatever it is. We all have that, but I agree with you. The downside of that is sometimes you want to have multiple identities. You know, we aren't just going to die on the cross of sharing everything, even with ourselves. But one of the things I was thinking about, I've always had a thing about relational databases and this idea of, although we operate in a multi-dimensional world, the constructs of the databases that we traditionally use tend to be in 2 dimensions because they fit on a screen or a piece of paper, Excel being one example. And you end up you can have a big complex Excel spreadsheet or several with interconnecting links, but it's still this kind of, I don't know, think of American road network where they're all in the same distance apart and they're all, you know, there are no corners other than 90 degrees. They're all blocks. One of the things that you said was you were talking about the 3 things that were important to you. One of them being relationships in this new model, which is music to my ears. But all my career, I've always loved visualization models, tools that visualize data that don't automatically produce a picture that is two-dimensional or multi-dimensional, fractal images, things like that. You might not know what the picture is, but basically you're trying to release the visualization tool from the restrictions of our perspective on the data to find relationships that it thinks are significant between different factors, but may not fit our models. And the challenge then when you get that image is to try and figure out what the hell it means. But that's often helped me think, do I need to think about this particular issue or this data set in a new way? Am I asking the wrong questions? It's kind of a self-QA. And one of the things Mark and I have talked about with our very old police officer intelligence hats on, when we've talked about some of the history of the systems, is within the police, we always had in the intelligence system a what-if box. The stuff doesn't fit in any easy box. It's not necessarily an entity. It may be a relationship that doesn't fit the relationships that we want to look at, like address or friend or family or football team I support or holiday venues I go to or music taste. But it might be significant. So you sort of chuck it in a box just in case later on somebody asks a question. You think, actually, I've got some data on that, but I couldn't fit it into my relational database. Does that come into how you're thinking right now? Because that, for me, a bit like John Elliott trying to anticipate how aliens might think, they're going to think like humans, and, the typical sci-fi where they all have 2 arms, 2 legs and 2 eyes. When reality, the chances are aliens may be of a life form and a thought process and a data process that doesn't fit any of our relational models. A bit like VHS trying to talk to Beta.
Yeah, it not only does it's actually a fundamental part of what we do. So one of the big things here is that when you're querying data, you don't necessarily know the structure of the thing that you're querying when you start out. And relational databases and traditional database models enforce that structure before you begin. This is why our query languages started falling apart for us. And we realized we couldn't do this in traditional models. It's because what I wanted to be able to do was apply a structure for the data when I'm querying and getting that in a particular way that then meant that I could understand that information, but also I could visualize it in new ways. So one of our background tasks, we've thrown it out as a challenge to local university, is saying, we have no idea how we might want to visualize this stuff in the future. Come back with different models. This is a completely new way of working. Come back with new visualizations and new ways of dealing with it. The box of stuff that you've got in the corner that doesn't fit anywhere else, we can take that in spades. And we can choose then to have abstract collections of these things. So again, the principle here that we're going in and having a predefined order to things, that we don't need any of that anymore. I'm saying that I could actually put in exactly the same set of things, because they're just of interest to me, is a mug, a door, a person, a conversation, a document. And I just want to have that abstract collection somewhere and work with that for a while. But not only that, I want to have a particular visualization of that. And the visualizations that we create in the system now use the same principle as everything else. So I'm able to send this across to you as have a look at this collection, Howard. But not just that, with the visualization that I'm currently looking at as well. So I can say, have a look at it. Now you're getting the context of the view of the data as well as the data. And we're able to share and interact on that data in a way that, again, no other system does this, where you just say, literally, I've got this thing, that thing, that thing, that thing, that thing, viewed this way. Okay, I'll pop it into a table because that's easy. Howard, have a look at this table. What do you think? And you're looking at the same data as me. Not copies of it. It's in real time if that's what you want to do. So, some of the stuff we're looking at is grabbing real-time data from manufacturing equipment on the shop floor and having local sensors and picking up when things are going out of kilter and triggering to a central system that then says, now, I need to get an engineer here. So if we take it into the aeronautical industry, for example, you've got a bit of a vibration on an engine. The local sensors feeding that data coming through saying we're slightly above temperature and we've got some vibration. In the meantime, that's triggered just an alert out to the manufacturing people saying, have a look at this. There's something not quite right with this. They can analyze it And in that same instance, it's already scheduling an engineer to be visiting that aircraft when it lands in Kuala Lumpur in 6 hours' time, that's got the right certifications, that has the right parts, that can look. We haven't done a single thing that takes us outside of our model here. We're able to do all of that without having to have yet another reference table, yet another interlink table, yet another technology that's clags on the side. We can do all of this within the stuff we're doing. So for me, the ability here to create the structure when you're querying is really important. I would like to have this information in this way, please. If that happens to be a table, fine. If it happens to be a bubbles diagram in 3 dimensions, fine. If you want it in a virtual reality headset and you can walk around it, don't care. That is just a representation of the information that is there. And we can build those representations using the data model itself as well. So I want these things in this way, with these colors, with these styles, with these fonts, whatever you want. That means I can take exactly the same data and present it in 20 different ways without having to actually have 20 different copies of that data on 20 different systems.
I love that because it reminds me of 2 things. Law enforcement, we've talked about evidence being this UK principle of best evidence. In other words, it's the closest to the source. So it's not had chance to be corrupted or manipulated. And separately within analysis, we've talked about the difference between raw data and that going through the process of collation and collection and evaluation and structuring before it becomes even information, and then a load more processes. So you're always dealing with, if data was food, processed food, you're never getting the raw ingredient. I've always trained my students with visualization tools, the various commercial things that are out there. Actually, your database is a visualization tool, if you can find a way of looking at it. The other tools are just the icing on the cake. If you could really look at the data and see the patterns in the data, the chances are those patterns are going to be more relevant because they're in the data. They're not purely a product of the visualization tool. And that's kind of what you're saying with this idea of one data pot can be displayed in many ways to many different audiences who can then apply their own particular window or perspective.
But again, you can attach whatever you want to it as well. So within that, you start saying, here's my one instance in a health system, for example. I'm me. Attached to me is an MRI scan. Attached to me is an X-ray. Attached to me is whatever prescription. But also attached to me in that kind of environment is, here are the people that are close to me. So that if something happens to me, and I end up in a care home or something along those lines, wouldn't it be good if you could actually use the location data to say, why not put them in somewhere that's close to the family so that they get a better quality of life? Now, what you're then getting is a completely different way of managing your beds, because you're no longer saying this person has to go in this hospital because it's closest to home. It may be that this is going to be some kind of chronic care, a long-term condition, something along those lines, where you're going to need to have people around that can actually deal with this. So what, from a quality of life perspective, can you change? And what can you introduce that are factors way outside your traditional models? Now, right now, if you tried to do anything like that with any health authority, they'd come back and say, we just have no way of being able to do that. But you have got, if you have a sensible data system, I'm sitting here now saying, okay, let's reinvent the entire world from a health perspective and put a proper health system together. But actually, if you start, let's flip this on its head. Traditional design has started out going back many, many, many years. I studied things like Jordan, Mascot, UML, SSADM. There were so many design methodologies over the years. They all start off with a context diagram, then a data flow diagram in one form or another. Actually, what we're not doing here is understanding what do people want first. We're starting with, who's going to use your system? No, you're assuming the system's there. What do you want this thing to do? You have to ask that question. You actually, there's a project that we started off, and it was with a company that manages offices globally. When we went in, we were the company that's been sort of pushed in to help integrate with a new platform that's coming in, and nobody really wants us there in that kind of context. The company that we're going into doesn't particularly want it, and yet another consultancy coming in. The partner that we're working with at that particular time doesn't want to do any more with the client because they've sold the package now. There you go. You sold that. Go use it. You're on your own. But just to get you over that hump on the learning curve, here's somebody that can help you. So when we went in, they were looking at how do we integrate this with our various systems, and how do we do things like GDPR compliance, because now we've got yet another set of data that we have to be concerned with. And I just stopped all of that and said, just hold on a second. What are you trying to do with this information? Now, this particular point, it was one of our people that was doing surveys, and they were sending out surveys saying, was the office clean when you got there? Was it open on time? Did you have everything you needed? Was the coffee okay? All these kind of things. So it sounds like it's a completely just normal thing, and we've all had them. The survey when you leave somewhere saying, "What do you think of our service?" From 0 to 5, would you rate us? Would you tell your friends about us? And all these sorts of queries. Actually, what they were using, these figures from these queries were being used to assess the managers of the facilities. And if you said that the office was dirty or that you didn't have the things that you'd ordered or anything, these actually affected the bonus for the manager of the facility. Therefore, this had a direct and material impact on the manager's salary and the legal perspective then, that the manager would then be saying, hold on a minute, you're sure I'm due a bonus? No, I'm not. So you've now got to evidence all of this. This wasn't a passive thing about whether your customers are happy. Actually, this has a monetary value and it has an impact on the bottom line. And this is critically important to the business. So all these people are sort of on the edge of this that were just treating it, it's just a survey, doesn't matter. Actually, it was really important and it was fundamentally affecting their business. And when you look at it in that kind of context, it changes, everyone then sort of sat up and said, okay, so how do we make this work for you? And it was a very different take on the same system. But what I will also say is that fundamentally, people have got design wrong. One of the reasons I love working with the guys at Capventis is, John, I mentioned before, the chief exec, he has a completely different way of designing systems. When I came to Capventis, I came from the old school. Here are all the design methodologies, and I've got loads of them under my belt. And I've got the tools then to be able to say, well, this one's applicable to this thing. It's a real time, or it's a data thing, or so we use this one instead. He actually had a model that was really, really, really nice, very simple, beautiful in its elegance, but it was done in Excel. So now John's going to kill me if he listens to this podcast, because I said, you know what, I absolutely love this from a design methodology, but I hate its implementation. Part of what we're doing now is being able to put that model straight into the platform that we're now working on. So I'm able to use exactly the same thing to design a system from the ground up. But once we've designed it, we're not designing a system and then building the system. We're actually saying, here's your system, because we've actually put the things in place as part of it. So we've actually also killed that design into implementation phase where people are trying to interpret what you've got in the design and how do we make that fit? Actually, you've just done that. So again, we think this is going to be disruptive. We hope it is, but it's, for me, that design piece, John's written a book on it and all kinds of things. So I think that it's probably for him to talk more about that side of things. But actually, it has a profound impact on the way that we design systems now. And for us, it's a very different world. It's a very different world to where I was back in the days of formal design methodologies and starting with the data and then going from the data to the processes and then from the processes to, I start getting tired of that very, very quickly these days.
I suspect we've lost a lot of our non-technical audience already, but if anyone's still with us, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to recap for the people who are still with us who are not techie. What we're saying here is if anybody has been online and you've entered data into a form, for instance, and maybe you typed it in capitals or maybe you typed it in some sort of way, and then when you click send, the system automatically changed your content so it would fit with the system. It's known in IT as an input mask. Essentially, Mike, what you're talking about is we're not just doing this on a text field. We're doing this as a design strategy and at the system level. And we're not just inputting fields of data. We're saying for many decades, we have allowed businesses and individuals to basically have a blank slate about what they record and how they structure that. Because the golden rule, which was sacrosanct in IT, was you basically don't get in anyone's way, right? If you wanted a list of cars and a list of telephones and a list of this, have as many lists as you like, and we'll have relational tables which are just lists of things of how things are linked. Those things are quite complicated. But what you're advocating now is, okay, what if we just have a list where there are only 3 fields, and those 3 fields are the thing, things about that thing, and things that that thing is linked to, which I think is the most simple way from a recording convention, is the most simple way you can record data about anything. And so by forcing input into the system through that, to stretch the analogy, instead of an input mask for a field, you've now got an input mask for all data. That immediately solves all of your, well, the vast majority of your analytical recall problems. And it's going to sound crazy to non-techie people, but essentially the takeaway is we've done it in a way that's incredibly messy for decades. It's creating industries around that messiness, but you're starting from scratch and saying, no, let's get it right first time so we don't go down that messy road. Is that a fair interpretation of what
that's a good summary. That's a really good summary. And I get carried away by my own enthusiasm at times. So the techie world is my playground. Apologies for that.
No, don't apologize. No, I'll be honest. Okay. When Howard many years ago said to me, because I'll be honest, I was bricking it when I first joined Howard's team, because all I knew about Howard was everyone telling me he was like a president of this intel agency, and he was like the god of intel, and like he won't let anybody. He only has the best people on his team, and then 2 weeks later he's saying, I want our intel unit to connect with the best. I was very worried how I was going to do that, and so that's why when you came up to Bishop Garth and had that, you are at the frontier of tech. You always have been. You've demonstrated that quite clearly. And I think that's the problem, right? And I think this goes back to a little bit of our AI worries, is that Howard is very operational. You're very techie. I'm somewhere in between. None of us have a complete grip on some of the situations we've had to deal with in some respects, because the situation is very complex, isn't it? Howard might be very operationally focused about what happens next, what's the risk, what the consequences if this goes wrong. I might be in a situation where I'm capturing this digitally, I've literally created databases for the teams that Howard has set up. And you've got you designing stuff, nuclear subs, other stuff. And it's hard, right? But you think about this, right? So what I'm saying is we're all stood at like kind of different sides of Mount Fuji, trying to get an idea of what Mount Fuji looks like. But in some ways, that's where AI, I think, can help a little bit, is that maybe if you can get your content into the written record in a useful way, Howard can get his content into the record, and I can. Then, in other words, we improve that conceptual gene pool of stuff that's written down. Then that's maybe AI can be that supportive tool to make sure that we're not missing something. I'm sorry if that's a bit abstract, but I think it's just for me, what this shows for me is, and I think that we've worked together for decades now. It shows that there are no one-man bands in this. Nobody can do it all. It's any enterprise, doesn't matter if it's law enforcement, business, whatever. Situations are so complex, you need a lot of people with a lot of different ideas and a lot of different takes, and nobody has the one right take. It's just you've got to have round tables like this one, and broader and wider. You've got to get people who wouldn't usually talk to each other talking to each other. I can't stress enough, like you doing that lecture at Bish. Yes, probably 95% of the people didn't approach you afterwards, probably didn't give you content, but I came and tapped you on the shoulder. And I know that you've done that elsewhere and you've had other people in that experience. I think it's really, and Howard's done the same. Howard has been very open, and it's quite strange in intel circles in the UK, because we normally let the US do it all, because the US have got CIA, they've got FBI, they've got a lot of the, what do you call it, They kind of write a lot of the doctrine, a lot of the published books and material. They've gone on Amazon, type in Intel. Howard, I think, is one of the most vocal UK Intel sources out there. Not in a tradecraft or anything operationally sensitive, but in a, okay, let's talk about this, let's incorporate this, let's get people in from non-English speaking cultures, get law enforcement from South America, let's get, Eastern Europe and all sorts. And I think it's, I guess what I'm saying in a very long roundabout way is it's thank you for including people like me and Howard in what you're doing, and to encourage other people to do so, because we have to get everybody talking to each other, because it's so easy to kind of collapse into our silos and never cross that boundary.
Yeah, I think I'm going to put in a bit of a footnote here as well to one of our devs. So we had a developer called Kieran Hughes, who unfortunately fell off a balcony when he was on holiday a couple of months ago and died as a result of his fall. One of his passions, his absolute passions, was creating a dev community out of the stuff that we're doing and sharing the knowledge and getting people to understand fundamentally how different these things can be and the best way of doing something. And part of his legacy for the team is actually he's got lots of, just across our code base now, we've got these sort of areas now where we say, okay, we can see where we was going with this and we can understand what he was doing. But part of that was, how do we share this information? How do we get people to be able to utilize this tech in a sensible way? So again, this isn't a pointy solution that we're pointing at somebody and saying, here, this will do your project management for you. This is actually something much broader than that. And as a result, people have to be able to understand what the heck it is we're on about. Okay, I went down a techie sort of rabbit hole a few minutes ago, but there are people that have to communicate this stuff. People have to actually provide ways for people to be able to use the tools and to be able to take it on. And I welcome the sort of transparency that you get from people like Howard around, here is information. Here's how you should be able to utilize it. Here are the right ways of utilizing it, because it is so easy to get this wrong and to make false assumptions. Back to the IP address being a person, just those sort of things. For people that don't necessarily understand what they're doing, it's critically important that we educate people, and I mean that in the nicest way, that people start to actually understand the tools that they have at their disposal. We keep going back to AI in this conversation. AI is a phenomenal tool. There's an entire industry that's being built around prompt generation and how to get the right prompts and how to get the right information out of your AI. I think that's important. But I also think it's really important that you understand exactly what it is you're trying to get out of it before you start tapping away on that keyboard. And you also understand what inputs have been available to that system before you start tapping on the keyboard. Because if you ask for something that isn't there and that it has no way of knowing, unfortunately with AI as it stands today, it can't think. It is just an algorithm. Therefore, it will give you an answer. And the problem with it right now is that you've got no way of determining that it's coming out with complete junk. So the stuff that Howard lectures, that you Mark as well, in terms of pushing out information, it's critically important that we get proper, good quality stuff out there that is actually factually based.
Yeah, just two last points, Mike, from me in what you were just saying. I've got a very old friend called Steve Gottlieb, an American chap who trains in Intel. And he's a one-man band, a character, but a lovely guy. And he came up with a phrase years ago, which I love. And the phrase was, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. And one of the things I notice all the time and push back against when I'm training people who are going to get involved in it, my side of information science and analysis that serves an organizational function, they're going to generate a product that helps decision makers. In my case, law enforcement, but I've done it in the private sector. You know, the arena doesn't matter. I've done some in the health service as well, or the health field. Firstly, the point that you made about, are they asking the right question? So you'll go to a meeting with often senior managers, and I wonder about this for employees of those organizations who will say, these are the data sets we have. This is and they may not realise this is the organisational culture that we have for managing these things and decision making and everything else. And you go, why? I'm not criticising it, but first of all, what is it you're trying to get to? Leave all that baggage to one side. Tell me what it is you're wanting to achieve in simple language that I can understand. That takes courage. It really does. And a courageous organisation that allows some of its staff, at least, to explore those areas. You might need people who will apply, the majority of your team will have a conveyor belt of producing the particular goods that you want, be it, in this case, an information product or a decision-making support product. That's all very well. It's not very challenging. It's a production line. But most of the software products are designed to do that because it's easy, and then flog it. And they make a lot of money out of it by saying, this is great. And you're thinking, yeah, it's good, but great it isn't. It has loads of flaws. But what I'm getting at is, one, that ability to question from the beginning, first principles. Even if you end up looking at what they do and thinking, well, actually, it's not a bad way, so I can work with that. But if you don't ask that question from the beginning, you are doomed to ending up with some of the intellectual problems and practical problems that you generate. And the second thing is, again, back to this human interaction. Forget machines to machines, data to data. This is about people. It takes a lot of courage as a human being in a group setting, be it an organisation or a business or a government or just a group, hobby group, or we three here, to stand up and say, actually, I think you might be doing this wrong, or I think there might be a better way, or can I challenge it? Particularly when most of us are our subordinates. I, like you, I'm very lucky, particularly now I've retired. I had a lot of leeway, even in my organisational life. I can't criticise my employers for some of the restrictions that were placed on how I would work. But even they gave me quite a bit of leeway, local managers and force managers, for which I'm ever grateful. They had issues, but they let me. But now I'm retired, I have total freedom. I can stand or fall by what I decide. I'm not accountable to anybody except my good lady and the cat, kind of thing, and the audience of this podcast. But that ability to free think and to challenge in an appropriate way has got to be one of the core skills of any budding, new to the profession, information scientist, whether they be steeped in the knowledge of the detail of technology like you are, or some end user codhead who just realises there's a problem in the machine, shall we say, and it's affecting what comes out. So I think those are two important points.
Challenge everything.
It's right for you to acknowledge the leeway you were given, but it's also worth noting that you weren't always given that leeway. And I know you took some risks, and those risks allowed things like me to go talk to Mike. And because I remember, for instance, after you left, and I was trying to bring Mike into that world, and I was getting pulled into offices saying, who's this Mike guy? And who's this John Elliott guy? And why you bring them in? And I had to go, and it's, you got it straight away. And it's like, I just say, look, I've met this guy and he knows his stuff and this is what we need to do. But I think in our world, it's quite easy for the portcullis to come down, right? And we sit in those silos. But that's why this podcast exists, is that, I'll be honest, this podcast for me is both a Hail Mary and it's also a bit of a black box, in that what I'm hoping for, my optimistic side says that there is a way to cut through the hype. There is a way to cut through the noise. If I can get enough people on this pod to share their view about how the world works, their journeys across the decades, then I'll capture enough content so that people who haven't been part of those worlds, people who haven't been part of big tech, people who weren't in the Intel world, people who weren't in like John's world or other worlds that we're about to explore, they get a sense of, wow, even though I speak the same language, and even though I might be grow up and I've probably been to the same schools and lived in the same place as these people, there's all these different worlds. Maybe I can think about things differently, and that will maybe not push us down the hype train, because I think, IT's always been full of hype, but I feel right now it's turbocharged, right? With it be AI, it was data science before, but the hype train was getting really... I hope this is kind of anti-hype. I hope this is tough to chew on, tough to listen to, but enough to get people thinking. That's the optimistic side. The pessimistic side is this. This is going to sound like a legal warning, but everything you do say is going to be taken down and noted in the transcript. So my hope is that basically, if nothing else, a bunch of Collator's transcripts will feed the machine. And maybe in centuries from now, when some algorithm is looking for content that is cogent but not popular, maybe this will come up, and then maybe it'll solve something. So let's try and wind it up then. Mike, is there anything else you want to talk about or just mention before we wrap things up?
No, thank you. Not particularly. Other than just to say, nod to the various people across my life. David Donahue, from Signal Radio back in the day, he opened so many doors without ever realizing. He died a few years ago now, and I sorely miss him. He was a really, really good friend. But he opened so many doors along the way, and probably never knew just what an impact he had. So one thing I would say here is that, as you look at people and you're working with them, they will present opportunities along the way. Another person, more recently, of course, is John Glennan at Cadventis. He's, again, back to Howard's point on latitude and yours, Mark, as well. The latitude to actually say, okay, let's do this thing. No one has to do any of these things. But if there is one thing out of this podcast that I would say to anybody, Mark, you've taken a big step in getting a podcast together and getting people on and getting them rambling and going through their ideas. Good on you. And I would urge anybody that's out there, grasp the proverbial bull by the horns, do it. Life's too short. Just get on with it. And if it means that you've got to reinvent half the world to do it, then do it.
Howard, anything else from you?
No, it's just great to catch up with Mike as always. He blows my mind, and he reassures my faith in free thinking, and that somebody out there is doing the right thing with, I know there's always a corporate direction, but that's just life. But with the right principles and the right goals and the right ideas, and they're taking risks, they're doing something new. Life's too short not to take risks.
I agree. And I would only add that I think with Mike, thank you for coming on today. There'll be links in the show notes for all of this, and we'll put in all the references that you made, especially to colleagues that are no longer with us and other current work that's ongoing. But I would like to just encourage people to kind of follow Mike and to catch up with what he's doing. I genuinely mean this, IT is full of people who are very good at hype, very good at being snake oil merchants. Mike is the polar opposite of that. If you can go to him with the most abstract and complex of problems, he will find a solution. I know this because I've done this multiple times. So look him up. Details will be in the show notes. And thank you for listening today. We hope you listen to our next episode. All the best. Bye-bye for now.